first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind playing tricks across the reeds. One of those long, lonely whispers that schemes an open field and vanishes when you try to listen harder. We were surveying a fallow tract on the edge of the old floodplain, mapping stones that didn't belong, a ring half swallowed by soil, shapes too orderly to be accidents. I told myself we'd log coordinates, collect a few samples, and move on. I didn't yet understand that some places are less found than they are awakened. We'd followed rumor more than records, farmhand talk of a sleeping circle exposed after a season of drought. The ground was oddly dry underfoot, as if rain had been politely avoiding this patch. Even the insects were sparse. We stood there with our gear and our rational explanations, and the field stood there with something older than explanations, older than us. Ellis, my friend, went quiet first. He crouched beside a half-buried marker, tracing a shallow spiral with a gloved finger. "This isn't glacial," he muttered. "This was placed." His voice didn't carry far. The air felt padded, like a room draped for a funeral. When I joined him, I saw the same spiral repeated on a second stone, then on a third. Threaded together, they made a pattern like breath. We took photos. We measured. We did the work. Still, that whispering warble kept brushing the edge of hearing. Too deliberate to be wind, too shapeless to be speech. "It's the reeds," I said, but I didn't believe it. I made a note in my field book. Localized resonance? The pencil trembled once across the page. On the walk back to the trucks, I looked over my shoulder. The field looked completely ordinary, brown, dull, honest, but something in me understood that we had not simply visited. We had introduced ourselves to whatever lived between those stones. That night, in my apartment miles away, the whisper came back. Thin as thread, running along the baseboards. It skimmed the vents. It pooled behind the bookshelf. I left the TV on for chatter, but the whisper worked beneath it, a tide under noise. The air felt a degree too cold, like late November slipped into August. I told myself surveys stick to your head. I told myself sleep would reset the world. At 2:17 a.m., a hairline crack lifted in the paint above my desk, like a tiny, sidelong smile. Plaster dust on the floor. No water damage, no vibration. I touched the wall and felt a faint hum, like a hidden transformer. The power strip was off. The hum wasn't electrical, felt present. I set my phone to record audio and left it face down. In the morning, the track was almost blank, almost. When I boosted the volume, there was a breathy movement at the edge of the waveform, a wavering pulse in 5 soft beats, then stillness. I replayed it until I knew the rhythm. Not random, not mechanical. Patterned. Ellis texted at sunrise. "Did you sleep?" I typed, deleted, then wrote, kept thinking about the spirals. He replied with a photo he'd stabilized. Stone markings stitched with faint radial lines, like a wheel or a throat. Voice lines? He wrote. I didn't answer. The whisper was louder with my phone in hand. When I left for work, the hallway outside my door smelled faintly of damp earth. I stood there with the key still in the lock, trying to convince myself that an apartment building can mimic a field if you think about it hard enough. In my pocket, the voice recorder vibrated once, as if something inside wanted my attention. We went back to the field with better gear. Contact mics, a parabolic, even a cheap thermal camera Ellis insisted on bringing for fun. There's a type of bravado that blooms when the sun is high and colleagues are near. We laughed at ourselves. The field didn't laugh back. It just waited the way old places do. We wired the stones. The contact mics reported nothing at first, then micro-variations. Surface tremors too regular to blame on wind. The parabolic glassed the center of the ring. Wind noise slurred across the headphones until something leaned into the static. A swelling, narrowing, swelling again. 5 counts. Rest. 5. Rest. I posted the pattern to muscle memory without meaning to. The thermal camera surprised us. Stones should read cool and even. The central marker carried a faint warmer band. A ring like a breath mark. Then it faded and returned, keeping time with the mic pulses. Something in the groundwork was exhaling heat shallowly into air that didn't want it. We found broken ceramics in the churn just inside the circle. Shards thin as fingernails, soot-kissed on the underside, scratched with half spirals. A bowl for burning? A throat for smoke? Ellis slid a shard onto a foam pad and said too brightly, "We'll run it by lab." I pretended my hands weren't shaking. When we packed, I noticed something had changed. Very small, very wrong. The reed heads at the edge of the circle were all bent inward, as if they'd leaned to hear us better. I did the careless thing. I put one shard in my jacket pocket to photograph later. Tiny, soot dark along the lip, etched with a wavering cut that didn't quite complete its spiral. A sentence left half-spoken. Felt heavier than it should, a denser weight than clay. "Only for a day," I said to the field, because superstitions come easy when you pretend you don't have them. On the drive home, the radio turned itself down and stayed there. Streetlights ahead flickered like they recognized my car and decided, briefly, not to. I told myself it was coincidence lining up in a neat stack. I didn't look at the passenger seat where I'd laid my jacket. I didn't want to see the pocket sag. In my kitchen, the shard sat on a dinner plate like an accusation. Light made the soot shine dully. The cut line caught and stretched the reflection. When I leaned close, the line bent my face into a warped echo. For a second, my mouth didn't belong to me. I set the shard inside a clear storage bin, just to be sensible about boundaries. The whisper in the apartment grew braver. It gathered itself into the corners, testing its voice in the angles. The rhythm kept the same 5-beat pulse, call, 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 rest, as if it had found the shape of my rooms and liked them. At 3:03 a.m., the bin lid popped once, the way plastic does under a temperature change. I sat up in bed and watched the dark doorway to the kitchen until dawn grayed the blinds. By week's end, the apartment had learned the ritual's breath. The whisper pressed at thresholds, an inland tide sloshing against doorframes. The hallway grew cooler by evening, as if a long corridor had been grafted into a short one. Coffee tasted like damp ashes, even fresh brewed. When I held the mug, heat receded into the ceramic as if shared with something else. My calendar filled with wakeful hours. When sleep took me, it took me into the field. Reeds leaning inward, stones yawning like teeth. A bowl raised at the center as though waiting to receive a name. In the dream, the bowl's spiral completed itself and light spilled upward, not warm, white like scraped bone. I started humming the 5-beat rhythm without realizing, tapping it into my thigh, my desk, the countertop. When I caught myself, I stopped, and the apartment seemed disappointed in a way that made my stomach cold. Audio from the night recorder offered, almost words, not language, not quite. Shaped breath pressed through a narrow place. The waveform crested and fell in those same measured hills, always 5. Ellis texted clips of similar pulses caught on his own bedroom mic. "You bring yours home too?" I asked. He replied, "Nothing physical." Then, "I think it's in the sound." I told myself to take the shard back. Instead, I set it on a folded towel and stared until dusk made the kitchen into a mouth. The county archive gave us dust and kindness. A clerk found a folded map drawn by a surveyor who liked tidy letters. In the margin near our field, he'd sketched a small ring and written "old stones removed," then scratched out the note and replaced it with "no feature," as if a second look had embarrassed him. In a binder of farm accounts, we found a hint. 50 years back, a field hand quit after strange frets at dusk, demanding his pay to leave before sunfall. A foreman annotated, "Boy spooked by marsh lights. There's always a way to write fear down so it sounds small. That's how fear survives." An older pamphlet, church newsletter, brittle as pastry, described a heathen circle toppled by righteous men. No date, no photo, only the instruction. Walk wide of the old place for 40 nights. Then it moved on to bake sale news. Ellis found a dissertation from the 70s. The author hinted at pre-Christian vocal structures in local rites, stone rings that might act as resonators for communal breath, a way to blend many voices into one. He called it throat didactics, teaching the ground to speak back. The paper ended abruptly. Note from the committee: insufficient evidence. Recommend narrowing scope. When we left the archive, the parking lot felt farther from the door than when we'd arrived. I walked the distance thinking about bowls, spirals, and the shape of a breath when it becomes a place. We went back one last time to document properly. That's what we said. Truth. We went because the apartment wouldn't quiet and the only way out was through. The field met us with silence so complete it recorded us in it. Each footstep, each breath, stamped into hush. Clouds low as hands. The reed heads all facing the center now, a congregation leaning toward a pulpit. We laid out the contact mics again, but this time the stones began humming before we touched them. 5 soft swells, then rest, as if we'd arrived late to a lesson. Ellis stood in the center and closed his eyes. It feels like standing inside a throat, he said, voice thin. We found more fragments at the ring's heart char, resinous scent baked into clay. On one shard, the spiral was complete. I traced it with a gloved finger, felt a groove too smooth for happenstance. In the groove, a faint residue, dark and glossy like old sap. I didn't want to know if it would soften with warmth. Leave it, Ellis said, reading me too easily. We've taken enough. I agreed. I meant it. And then the whisper pressed in from the reeds. The 5-count rhythm now braided with a second line riding above it, higher and thinner, like a harmony arriving late to a funeral. We backed away together. The reeds bowed further inward, like a polite nod. Somewhere behind us, a crow laughed like a hinge. After the second visit, my apartment began to change shape. Doorways felt longer. Corners held their breath. The thermostat insisted on 72 while my skin read 60. Sounds learned to arrive in 5-beat patterns. Elevator clunk, pipe tick, footfall overhead. Everything practicing the lesson until the lesson owned the room. I set a small bowl of water on the counter. Stupid, reflexive offering. Something I'd seen in too many books. The water went still as glass. For a moment, I saw the field reflected there, reeds and cloud. But I was in a 4th-floor kitchen with no clouds to borrow. The reflection rippled once, then smoothed like a hand had passed over it. Ellis stopped answering texts. His last message was a short clip. His bedroom lit by streetlight, shadow purling across the ceiling like breath held to a mouth. There was a bowl on his nightstand. The water inside trembled 5 counts, then steadied. His caption, "It wants inside," I called. No answer. I walked to his building and buzzed. A neighbor cracked the door and frowned at me. "He left," she said and shrugged. "Early, bag in hand." I stood long enough in the lobby that the security camera forgot to be discreet about watching me. When I got home, the shard lay where I'd left it. The bin lid was ajar. The apartment exhaled, and the 5-count arrived inside my breath. It began just after midnight. The apartment settled into a hush so thick it erased the city. Outside traffic went silent, or maybe I stopped deserving to hear it. The 5-beat came first, patient as always. Then the harmony line braided above it. Nearer now, a breath pressed through a ring of bone. The water in the bowl trembled to the count. The shard warmed against the plate. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. The apartment seemed to have grown taller by a story. The ceiling pulled away like a night sky. The whisper condensed into a not voice that still communicated. Not words, but acceptance. As if I'd finally learned the first lesson and it could move to the second. The air gathered in the doorway and pressed inward, much like the reeds had done. Light thinned, imitating candle without flame. The shard on the plate rolled once to complete its spiral, then stopped. In the bowl, a line of ripples merged until the surface became lens clear. I saw the ring again, not memory, not quite vision. more like the space between them where meaning lives. Stones as mouths, the center as a round throat. People, so many, standing outside the circle, facing inward, each with a palm lifted as though warming hands over a low flame. 5 breaths together, then rest. 5, then rest. Teaching the ground to speak and the ground saying back, heard. A sound like a footstep crossed the living room and stopped behind me. Not heavy, old, patient. There are moments when you decide whether fear is the only story you'll tell yourself. I turned my head and said, I will return what I took. The apartment exhaled, and the bowl's surface calmed like a satisfied animal. At dawn, I drove. The roads felt newly made, as if I was the first to use their lines. The field greeted me with a chill that carried hospitality in it. I stood at the ring's edge and set the shard in the churned dirt where the spiral completed itself. The gust that passed smelled like damp clay and pine. The reeds lifted their heads a fraction. The 5-beat quieted to a resting pulse. Ellis. I called the name softly, not expecting an answer from the human mouth that had once owned it. Instead, something at the circle's center accepted the shape of my question and gave back a small, cool silence. The kind you get after a song ends well. I realized silence can be an answer. Back home, the apartment resumed its ordinary noises. The whisper learned boundaries, staying behind the walls like good plumbing. The bowl of water went still. Coffee tasted like coffee again. But some patterns don't undo. My footsteps sometimes fall in 5s. My breath sometimes measures. And when I wake at 3:03, I know a conversation is happening just beyond drywall. In the archive, there was a line I didn't tell you about, written in a wavering hand at the bottom of a page. Leave their mouths where the ground left them. They are not for the house. I think about that more than I should. Sometimes I drive past the field and don't stop. Windows up, radio low, the world behaving. From the road, it's just reeds and dull earth and a scatter of stones like bad teeth. But if you roll the window down and listen closely, you might hear a lesson being taught very patiently to the dirt, and the dirt repeating it until it belongs to the land again.